Get more confidence. Get that promotion. Get moving up the corporate ladder. Get a better gig with an MBA from MEI's Business School at Texas A&M University. Whether you're starting out or stepping up, now you can take your career to a whole new level with a full-time MBA in College Station and convenient weekend options at Houston City Center. Texas A&M has a program to suit your schedule. Visit mba.tamu.edu. And gig 'em, Aggie.
Howdy, welcome to MEI's MasterCast. I'm Shannon Deeger, the Assistant Dean for Graduate Programs, here with your marvelous host, Ben Wiggins.
Good morning, Shannon. How's it going?
Good morning. It's good. How are you?
It's a beautiful day in Aggie land.
It is. It's rainy.
It is a little rainy, and sometimes that's okay too.
No, it's good. I think it's needed, so I'll take it.
Yep.
It's been good.
It's raining all this week, and we will release this later on, but today is Memorial Day, so happy Memorial Day to you.
Yes, and thank you to those who have served.
Absolutely.
Today on the show, we have Stephanie Murphy. Stephanie is a former executive MBA student from our program. She is really incredible and was great to talk to. She currently serves as the executive chair of the board for MEI Technologies, and she also founded Alpha Space Test and Research Alliance. MEIT is a woman-owned small business that provides innovative technical services and solutions in space access, engineering, modeling and simulation, and IT or cyber industries. Alpha Space Test sends tests up into space, so they will do scientific tests in these little, I'm going to explain this horribly, but little pods as part of a unit that goes up into space and basically rent space on that unit to run different scientific tests. Additionally, she's a member of the NASA Space Center Joint Leadership Team and serves on the Board of AM Biotechnologies and the Bay Area Houston Economic Partnership. She, as I said, is one of our former students, and we are proud to welcome her to the show.
I'm looking forward to it.
We welcome Stephanie Murphy to the show. How was your weekend? How was your holiday weekend?
Yeah, so far it's been great. Rainy today, so today's probably going to be more of an inside day with the family and the kids.
I heard there has been some Overwatch playing at your house.
There has been, yes. My 15-year-old is a big Overwatch fan, and my 9-year-old son, so I have two boys that are 15 and 9, and my daughter's 13. She's never on the games, right? She's more of a TikTok, iPad kind of girl. But the boys are on Overwatch and on video games, and my husband sneaks up there a little bit too. So everybody's having a good time upstairs on the games.
This sounds like my kind of world.
Yeah.
Love it. What is your favorite superpower?
I think if I could pick one for myself, it would be sort of that matrix where you freeze time for a minute and you can kind of take in the scenery. So my kids are getting a little older. And I'm a pretty busy lady, and I am getting a little more sentimental, I feel like, as they get older. So, if I could sort of freeze a couple moments and just sort of take it in, that might be what I'd like to do. Sort of, kind of just take in the moment.
Would you want to also be able to do like the crazy gymnastics while you freeze time?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Maybe reposition or, play some pranks on people along the way, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think, if I could just slow everything down or even freeze it for a moment and take it in, that might be kind of the cool thing.
It sounds very cool. I would like to live in that world too. Let's back up a little bit. Where did you grow up?
So I mostly grew up in Clear Lake, Texas, right?
Oh, okay.
In Houston. My dad was in the Air Force, and he was stationed at the Johnson Space Center. And we moved to New Mexico for 4 years while I was young, and then right back to Houston into the same house. And so I've been in Houston mostly since I was 6 years old. I went to Clear Lake Elementary and Clear Lake Intermediate and Clear Lake High School. And so I, grew up here, and my dad retired from the Air Force and started his company here. My mom was a teacher, so great little life.
So you already answered one of the questions that we normally ask. What did your parents do? How did that impact you? How did that impact you? You just said your dad was in the Air Force, retired, started a company. Your mom was a teacher. How did that frame your early experience?
Probably really what framed it mostly is my dad was an engineer in the Air Force, stationed here at the Johnson Space Center, working the space program.
Right.
And when he was in his early 40s, he had a heart attack, 41.
Oh.
And my mom was a teacher at the time. She had just actually gotten her master's after I was born. So I saw my mom, continuing her education. And he decided he had to do better and leave something better to his family if something were to happen to him. I think it was just this huge wake-up call that, he had 3 kids. I'm the youngest of 3. And so he decided he was going to, do better. So that's really what propelled him into starting his engineering company in the early 90s. And, he always had an emphasis on education for he and my mom. So they grew up really poor in South Texas. He was a migrant worker as a kid and, picked cotton and fruits and things like that. And he always emphasized education for us. So that shaped all of us along the way, but it also made us realize we want to do better for our families.
Talk a little bit more about that. You're thinking of in terms of leaving a legacy. Was it also helpful in terms of entrepreneurial education? Many people who have been on the show have had a parent who either had a good experience or in some cases a not so good experience with entrepreneurship. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So my dad, he's an engineer first, but he's a great businessman and he's super entrepreneurial. And we got to see him start the company. We got to see the struggles that went along with that. I was in high school when he started the company, and he was so dedicated to it and so impactful. And at the time, when I was younger, looking back, I may have almost been resentful, right, that he was spending so much time getting this business started. I didn't really appreciate it. But from the time I was a teenager, he started teaching us lessons in business. And he and I are really close. We've always been. I'm the only girl. I'm sort of daddy's girl, right? And so, we would have these conversations just almost on the daily without even realizing it. And he started really mentoring me at a super young age. So that company took off, but it, was really rocky. In fact, he almost shut it down. And he was selling off his office equipment. He's got a great story about that. He had like one employee, a half-time employee and himself, and he was selling off the office equipment. He was going to shut down the company, and he was selling the fax machine. So he went to get the fax machine to sell it, and behind the fax machine was like the rolled up fax paper of a fax that had come a couple days before, telling him that he had won his first government contract, and it had been sitting there for days.
Hey.
And there's like a time limit to respond, so he had like just a few hours left to respond and accept the award. And so that's kind of this little story we love to tell, like, right when he was like selling off everything, he found this little gem behind the fax machine. So
what a great story. What a great story.
So it's great. We have a newsletter at the company and we call it Just the Facts, right? Playing on words like FAX. And, we try to remind people of that story, and it's kind of where we started. So yeah,
that's amazing. I love that. That's like something out of a movie.
Yeah, it really is. So, there were some rocky days there. So we got to, I got to see that and learn from him that, you got to be resilient and you got to keep going. And really along the way, MEIT has been in business now about 25 years, a little more than that. No, is that the math on that? 92. We started in 92. So, yeah. And along the way, he, my dad and now with me together, we've probably launched off a dozen other companies. And some of those have been successful and some of those have failed miserably. But it, kind of what a on-the-job learning experience I've gotten to have by kind of dipping into all these different business enterprises with him. So I've been able to do that along the way. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I know that feeling. I started two companies previously, one in LA, one in early times back in Texas, and both of them failed. Kyle and I have started a business together, and it's kind of in flux with quarantine right now. And then we're kicking around another idea at the moment. So
Yeah.
I'm one of those fail until you succeed people. Um, but yeah, so I admire that. I admire that a great deal. And I feel like the business people that I respect the most have had a lot of ideas that didn't work.
Yeah.
Bill Simmons is, I know him more as a sports writer than as a business person, and he just made a huge amount of money on the Ringer's sale to Spotify. But
Oh yeah.
That was his thing. But he's had a bunch of stuff that he's tried. He had a TV show that bombed horribly, and has done a bunch of other stuff that kind of didn't work out. I think comfort with failure is something that the business world is starting to adopt more wholesale.
Yeah, I think so. There's some trendy buzzwords around that, and fail fast, right? Sort of came out, and
Right.
If you're going to fail, do it fast and pick up and move on and be resilient. There's little catchphrases. Rise and reach, right? Once you stumble and fall, you got to get back up. You got to keep reaching for the next thing. So it's sort of an accepted thing, but it's just sort of accepted as a part of our culture and our company as well. Like, that's sort of the foundation that my dad laid when he founded it was, look, we're going to go out and try things. And, he's a guy full of little analogies and sayings. And, he always says, we're not going to let it stop us just because it's not easy to do, right? Those difficult things are the things worthwhile. So, so I had a great experience learning from him and seeing from him at a very early age. I mean, since I was a teenager, about going after different business ventures and what you consider, and certainly the business side, but then also just the motivational side and sort of that drive or passion he had to go after things that were unique and solutions that were unique and sort of innovative. I got to get a little taste of that too. And it's addictive once you start developing a cool technology, or you see how things come to fruition, especially, in the space program, with that sort of backdrop. It sucks you in. It's such an addictive thing.
I can definitely understand that. I mean, I haven't really been around the space realm a whole lot, but it makes total sense. One of the things, going back to failure for a brief moment, I think we have to check our privilege a little bit in that respect, because there's definitely some nuance to how you pursue the things that will force you sometimes into failure. And what I mean is, there are good failure outcomes and there are failure outcomes that are not so good. For example, like, lean entrepreneurship has taught many of us that it's you want to be constantly iterating, but you want to be doing it in such a way that you're not spending a lot of money until you start to get a sense of what's working. And so if someone were to just say, okay, I just need to go into business and start doing stuff. Yes, but start doing stuff while not spending much money.
Yeah.
And that's not something that we talk about a whole lot. It's just something that everyone kind of understands, but it's not obvious. And so those of us who have been around business education a fair bit, we kind of have this built-in advantage when it comes to just go out there and fail and there's no problem. Well, if you take on $100,000 worth of debt and you don't have any savings, then that is a little bit more of a problem. So we have to be careful.
Yeah. One of the challenges we have sort of along the lines of what you're talking about is, we have really smart engineers, and they don't have a lot of business training, some of them, and they'll engineer things forever, right? Because that's what they do. And that's what they bring to the table. And it's so challenging sometimes to reset and focus them on, like, look, we've only got to engineer it so that it's good enough or reliable enough. We're not trying to work in the lab and engineer it forever. And so sort of crossing that threshold is really been a challenge sometimes, and getting our engineers who we work closer with, especially in Alpha Space, which is the startup, getting the engineers to appreciate, we can only engineer the solution so far, and then we've got to move on to the next thing, or take it to market or whatever. They struggle with that sometimes.
The two biggest enemies of great are good and perfect.
Yeah.
Backstory then. Give us 60 seconds on your road to MEI's and MEI. It sounds like MEI has been kind of around for a while from what you said earlier about your dad, but give us the timeline if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, I don't mind. So really kind of three things happened that got me to MEI's. So I had already worked at MEI Technologies since I got my undergrad. So I had been there a little over 10 years. Okay. And moving up in the company and in the corporate office. And my dad founded MEIT, so I really felt this obligation and responsibility to do a good job and give back to the company in the best way. And I felt like it was time for me to sort of do the next thing. So I was considering, business school or law school. And one of my great mentors, he's an attorney, and he said, you could always hire lawyers. You need the business education. You need to go back, get your MBA.
I'm glad you chose the Jedi and not the Sith.
Yeah. So that was that sort of got me in the mode where I was looking at going back to school. And then one of my brothers is in the Air Force, and we have a really friendly sibling rivalry going on. And he's a pilot in the Air Force, and he actually went back and got his master's degree. He's also an Aggie undergrad, but he got his master's online from the University of Oklahoma, I think. I said, I'm going to go back to A&M. I'm going to get my master's from A&M because I'm going to one-up you, right? So that was sort of in the back of my mind. And then I was actually at an Aggie 100 luncheon because my dad was receiving the Aggie 100 award. And Ricky Griffin was at my table. As they seat faculty at the table as guests when you buy a table there. And he was talking to someone else at the table. And he was talking to someone else at the table about, hey, you might want to consider going back. We have this executive and professional program in there in Houston. And I just kind of heard him talking about it. And I said, can you tell me a little more about that? And so he kind of told me, and that's really what did it. It just sort of all came together for me. They were opening up City Center, which was a little closer to me than the Woodlands. And so I visited the program website and, applied, and the rest is history.
Fantastic. What is MEI Technologies' mission? It sounds like a fascinating organization, but what are you there to do?
Yeah, we're really there just to bring high-tech solutions to our government customers who need them. So we support NASA and the Department of Defense, mostly around space-based industries. So we really bring solutions to them through great employees and people and knowledge. So that's kind of what we do at MEIT. We support engineering solutions, IT solutions, cybersecurity solutions. We have folks who work on all kinds of things, from supporting the astronauts, like health and safety and the food lab and spacesuits, to engineering analysis for ballistic missiles, and we do wargaming scenarios for the Air Force. I mean, we kind of spread the gamut on engineering services. Very traditional sort of government contractor role.
Did you guys build the UFOs from March?
Yeah, no. We didn't.
I assume, so brief tangent, I assume that those are not actually from another world. I mean, if they are aliens, fantastic, but otherwise I assume that it's just some sort of technology that nobody can talk about. And
yeah, I don't know what it is. And if I knew, I probably couldn't tell you, know?
Right. We'll talk offline.
Yeah. So we do have some classified work, and we have guys who have access to work that's classified, but those are the kinds of things we can't discuss.
How does that jive with Alpha Space?
Actually, it was a technology that we developed at MEIT. Maybe developed isn't the right word. It was really a set of experiences that we had at MEIT that led us to an opportunity to start Alpha Space. So one of the things we do at MEIT is we integrate payloads for the Air Force. So there's a space test program, which is now part of the Space Force. Kind of cool. We actually support the new Space Force. And for over 20 years, one of the roles that we've had is we integrate all these payloads that they're going to send into space for testing. And so there was a payload that we had integrated 8 times prior, known as the MEI, which is a materials experiment payload. It started during shuttle days and continued to space station. And, around 2010, NASA put out a call for ideas to commercialize space station. They were looking for services and products to use to commercialize space station. And so we decided to sort of take all the experience we had integrating this MEI prior and submit it as a privately owned facility and a commercial facility. And that's really what the whole basis of the startup for Alpha Space was.
You keep smiling when you say the word payload, which I
know, because I don't know if that's a common word, right? We talk about payloads all the time, but
it's an Overwatch word as well. Okay. So what? I guess my question is, where is the boundary between MEI and Alpha Space? Like, what led to the need for a separate company to do one versus the other?
We could have responded to this call for commercialization as MEIT, but it's a completely different risk profile for the business. And so I had just graduated from MEIS in 2014 with my EMBA, and was in this great sort of cadence of schoolwork and being busy, and it kind of resets you, when you're committed for 2 years to that program.
Yeah.
And I was really just kind of motivated and a little bit hungry. And so as we were talking about this opportunity in MEIT and all the risk it had, we had discussed, let's spin it off as a subsidiary or a separate entity to help, mitigate some risk. Commercial space flight is risky, and we didn't really know how this was all going to pan out and what liabilities were going to be there. And so as we were discussing that, I kind of said to my dad, hey, I'd really just kind of like to take this and run with it. And he said, go ahead. And that's really kind of what started it. So for a while, I sort of left MEIT, and I took a couple of employees with me and hired a couple more, and we went and started a commercial space company. So really different feel and vibe from MEIT, which is, more traditional services, government services, selling people by the hour, right? People's knowledge by the hour. That's MEIT. Alpha Space was, we had to go design and build this testing facility and get it through the NASA safety process, and go help develop a commercial space market and, sell to customers. So it's just a different business feel altogether.
Yeah, that makes sense. What has been the biggest perk of executing on these two missions for you and moving back and forth between the two? What's the most unexpectedly fun thing about that?
I get to meet a lot of really cool people, first of all. And, starting, with a startup, you've got to kind of hit the pavement and go visit customers and develop a market. So Alpha Space has really given me a chance to do sort of the up and out element of owning a business, right? I'm visiting customers a lot more. I go to conferences. I speak at a lot of conferences. I, give a lot of presentations. MEIT is sort of more my down and in, where I get to focus on the people a little bit more. And, we have a lot more employees at MEIT. We're close to 400 employees. So that's where I get to focus on sort of organizational management. And I guess I kind of get the best of both worlds, balancing the companies that way.
What's the most starstruck you've ever been?
It was really cool to see Elon Musk come speak at one of the conferences we were at. He's a unique person, SpaceX is a company that's doing amazing things right now. So that's probably the most starstruck. It's always cool to see the astronauts and meet the astronauts too. And, most of them are so humble and kind, and you start visiting with them, and it's sort of a bizarre thing because you really, they're sort of these superstars, but you start to visit with them and they're just sort of regular people. Their kids go to school with your kids, they live in your neighborhood or whatever, but it's really cool to kind of meet some of the astronauts too, especially some of the ones on the recent missions where they've been longer missions, and there's sort of been an emphasis on the women astronaut, in the course. So that's been really cool.
Yes. And tell us a little bit about life on Saturn Lane, Mission Control, Johnson Space Center. What does a day look like there? Do you get to say things like go, no go for launch and stuff like that?
Yeah, if I do, it's really, I'm just saying it to myself in my office, right? Nobody's listening to me for a launch countdown. So, Saturn Lane is MEIT's headquarters. That's where our corporate office is. Although most of our employees sit on site with the customers we support. So we have employees all across the country on different Air Force bases or NASA centers. So, that's just kind of where the corporate rhythm is set at MEIT headquarters. We get to, go across the street to Johnson Space Center and check on our employees and, maybe run through mission control and get to see cool things like that, watch the launches. But, there's no go or no go, not by me anyway.
Yeah.
And Alpha Space, our headquarters is really close to Johnson Space Center too, on Gemini Lane. So, all space related street names there. And that facility is a little bit different because our employees actually work in that facility. So we actually have like an operations center. We can control our payload that's on the space station. We can command it from there. We have a clean room. So, the guys get dressed in their bunny suits and get in that clean room to work on the space hardware. So that's a little more like of a lab, hands-on type of office.
For the uninitiated, and by the uninitiated, I mean Benjamin Wiggins, among others, can you please share a basic understanding of low Earth orbit and commercialization in this field? What do people need to know about this?
Yeah, so low Earth orbit is really just the space around the Earth up to about 2,000 miles. And then you go into mid-Earth orbit and high Earth orbit, right? So the space station lives at low Earth orbit. And that's probably the most significant thing to know there. And NASA is trying to commercialize low Earth orbit. So they really want to get out of the business of managing the space station at that level so that they can focus on deep space missions like getting back to the moon, getting back to Mars, or getting to Mars, right? We've not been to Mars yet, except for the rovers. And so that's sort of what they mean when they talk about it. And they've done a couple things to promote commercialization of low Earth orbit. So there's Commercial Crew Program, which is probably what people think about the most if they think about commercializing space. So SpaceX actually this week is supposed to launch 2 astronauts into space from a commercial, privately owned rocket, right? SpaceX owns that rocket. It wasn't built for NASA. So that's the first time since the shuttle program that we're going to be able to launch astronauts from the U.S. To get to the space station. So that's a really big deal. So that's one piece of commercialization is Commercial Crew. The other is commercial cargo, right? So SpaceX and Northrop Grumman fly cargo resupply missions to space station all the time. And they've been doing that successfully for a while. And that kind of goes under the radar. It's not as exciting or as glamorous as sending astronauts into space. And the third way NASA's trying to do it is with commercial service providers. So they've opened up the space station for about a dozen private companies to provide services at the space station. And you can turn around and sell those services to private entities or universities or other government agencies. And so for us, that's where Alpha Space fits in, is we own the MISI. It's a privately owned facility. And so we can open up access to, some guy tinkering with something in his garage and help him get it into space to test it if he wants to do that. Where before you can't, you had to be a NASA scientist to be able to have your science fly. That's not the case anymore. So that's sort of commercialization of low Earth orbit. And then, like any sort of, it's sort of like the next revolution, right? There's things that develop along with it. So there's starting to do in-space manufacturing, and pharmaceuticals have been going on in space for a while because of the environment there, the microgravity environment. So everyone thinks, there's no gravity in low Earth orbit. That's not true. There is gravity. You're just in a free fall, right, around the Earth. And so everybody's seems weightless, and it's microgravity, really. But it's only because the space station is really just in a continual free fall around the Earth. And so that opens up the door for different kinds of science. If you think about it, there's no like buoyancy in space. Mixtures come together really well. Heat doesn't rise. Fluids don't flow the same way. So there's just a ton of science that can be done at the national lab there that you can't replicate on Earth.
How does that help pharmaceuticals? What I mean, you said all of these things, but how does that help for I assume you're developing new drug compounds in some way or another. How does that contribute to the process? It just gives you more options, I guess, or
I think it's
I'm not connecting the dots here.
Yeah. I think it's for pharmaceuticals. That's not really what we support, but a lot of it is around sort of protein crystal structures. And so because there's no buoyancy, the structures form in almost a perfect way. There's on Earth where there's buoyancy and there's fluid flow, and they're trying to get these crystals to form for medication delivery or diagnostics or whatever. These other features of Earth's gravity get in the way. But in microgravity, these mixtures come together really in a uniform way, and it gives them much better results for drug development. This from a gal who, I've got 2 business degrees, right? I don't know anything about pharmaceuticals, but you get to learn a whole lot about it when you work in the industry. So
that was a good description for a layperson. In your opinion, how big is the market for the commercialization of this space? What does this look like? Are we talking about 100 space stations all in low Earth orbit in 50 years? What is? It seems like there's a lot of possibility here, but you have to have so much infrastructure in place to capitalize on it. Where is this going to go?
Yeah, you're right. You do have to have the infrastructure in place, and NASA's put together the space station. NASA and there's really 5 space agencies together that have put together the space station. It's actually a remarkable international feat. But they've provided the infrastructure. Right now they're providing subsidies, and I think that's exactly what you need to do, because the barrier to entering this is really the launch cost. The cost of getting things off the ground is just massive. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's a lot of room, right now communication satellites, are a huge industry in space. And as commercialization opens up and subsidies are opening up and people have access who didn't have access before, I think there's this whole innovative sort of world that's going around right now. And, I think what you're going to start to see is like in-space manufacturing. There's like optical fibers and things like that they can produce, actually 3D print in space that, are better than anything they can replicate on Earth. There's going to be space tourism, I think. People are going to want to pay for a ride to go into space for the excitement and the thrill of it. I think it's going to open up things like advertising. I wouldn't the MEI's Business School love to have their banner on the side of a rocket, or and then there's other things. People who are space junkies just for the novelty of it may want to send something up into space. So I had the chance last year to send my husband's Aggie ring into space. So, his Aggie ring traveled 170 million miles in a year around the Earth. And it's kind of a cool sort of, party novelty thing to talk about. I didn't send my ring because space travel is dangerous and I wanted mine to come back for sure. So I didn't send mine, but I sent his. And it's just sort of a really cool thing, for the novelty of it because you can access it now. So
if you had to put a number on it, let's say, and let's set a 50-year time horizon, because obviously in the long run, the potential it just leaps by orders of magnitude the farther in the future you go. But are we talking about $1 trillion market? Are we talking about a $10 trillion market? Like what, in terms of what's going to be available in the next 50 years? I mean, it's hard to, I'm asking you for something very specific out of this giant sandbox, but I don't know, what are we looking at here?
Yeah, I think the potential's there for it to be, $1 trillion market, but it's still sort of, I think there are elements to it that we haven't, you just can't even fathom yet, like what may be coming. So there's low Earth orbit and commercialization of that. There's trips to the moon that are coming. And there's, so for all those things we talk about at low Earth orbit, setting up commercial habitats and tourism, all those things apply at the moon as well. Manufacturing applies at the moon as well. And then, off to Mars and what's that going to look like? What are communication satellites going to look at? What is defense going to look like in space? I mean, that's a huge concern for the Department of Defense today is, the thought that the next big war might really be a space war. And how do you maintain your constellations of satellites and take out other countries' satellites and gather intel? I mean, it's just sort of all of the solutions that go into that and the technologies that go into that there are things that are just unfathomable. I think it's just wide open. It's just sort of like really the next frontier. I mean, it really is. It's such a cliche thing to say, right? It's the, space frontier, but it's really true. I just think, for all those things that came about during the Industrial Revolution, you're going to start to see that replicate in space.
So what's something that we can't do now that you feel like we'll probably be able to do in 10 years?
Oh, I think easy space tourism is going to be a thing in 10 years, at least to low Earth orbit and commercial privately owned habitats in low Earth orbit. I think 10 years will be there. What's interesting to watch is how is the market going to unfold and how is demand going to unfold, right? So on one hand, we're developing all these technologies and trying to further space technologies, but there are a limited set of customers today. And so what will be interesting to watch is how will that market develop and how can people apply what they could do at low Earth orbit to benefit life on Earth, really, right? There's diagnostic things you can do, medical things you can do, there's materials things that you can do. But for sure, I think space tourism, private habitats, I think there's going to be an increase in satellite and CubeSat launches for small experiments. And I think it's just going to be accessible for people who never had access to it before. And so along with that comes educating people about what are the benefits in space and how does that help them make a better product here, right? How does that help them? And so it's a tough hill to climb, but I think for sure there may even be, space tourism to the moon in 10 years. I mean, it's just a crazy thought, but it could be. And then the development of propulsion systems that are private also that, may help us get to Mars. It's just kind of crazy.
Fascinating stuff. Something that you just said, and kind of the prospect of people, especially civilians, being up in space, anytime you see a space story, like there's always somebody that has to sacrifice themselves by, like tearing open their suit or like jettisoning themselves off into space. Like there are a lot of ways for things to go very, very, very wrong in space, especially when you're dealing with like living beings. So what does your team do to account for unexpected contingencies in orbit? Like, what are the safety precautions? What are the things that would surprise someone living here on Earth the most someone living here on Earth the most? What are the things that would surprise a civilian the most about what you just have to be really careful with?
We don't touch really any of the rockets or capsules that carry the astronauts. But what we do develop and build are these like payloads, right, that have to go to space station, and they have to be rated safe for human, right, human flight. And so, there are a lot of startups who are trying to get payloads through to the space station. And one of the biggest obstacles for them is they don't understand NASA's safety process. So as long as there's humans involved and it's a man-rated space flight effort, right, where people are going to be involved, NASA takes that very seriously, and it's no longer just about your operations risk, right, the risk of your company doing good business or whatever. It's about the health and safety of the crew.
Sure.
And so a lot of these startups who are trying to get some payloads through and experiments through, they don't appreciate that safety process and how rigorous it is. It really, truly is, a multi-step process. Our guys are experts in it. They do a great job getting things through. And that's why they do it for the space test program. Actually, any Air Force payload or really DoD payload that's going to be tested in space on a human-rated flight system goes through our team of guys to get it through that safety process. And so in doing that, our team last year we hit this awesome milestone. Actually earlier this year, we were able to enable 1 million hours of science in space, of research.
Yeah.
And, if you think about that, that's just true hours in space of research. And then that number, it is an order of magnitude bigger in terms of the research that's done on Earth that enabled all of that. So it's just really a cool milestone that we hit. But so I'd say that's one of the challenges is there's this, safety process around crew and health safety that people don't appreciate in terms of space station, right? You don't have that if you're building a CubeSat that's going to launch, off of just a little rocket. But when there's people involved, it's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, that makes sense.
One other thought on that question is like, one thing people don't always appreciate is the range of skills it takes to keep people in space. So, I mean, you've got your brilliant engineers who are developing the rockets, you've got your astronauts, but it takes this massive crew of people from PhDs to technicians to make the space program work. So even in our company, we may have, on one end, we may have a PhD who specializes in acoustics to make the astronauts feel comfortable and minimize vibration noises and things like that on space station. And then we have in that same group of employees, we may have a 20-year-old tech who's working in school who's doing stuff in the food lab, or we may have a refrigerator tech who's supporting the refrigerator that holds the space food, or it's a whole gamut of skills that are used to get people into space. So that's another thing I think people don't always appreciate. You kind of think about the superstars that you normally see right on The Martian, right? These teams of NASA experts who are problem solving and those
walking in slow motion.
Yeah, those teams exist. Mission control is full of all these guys sitting at consoles, and for every percent the console, there's a room full of people or a team of people supporting them. But there's also sort of these little quiet heroes sort of under the current that you don't get to see.
knowing what you know now, if you could redo your development of skills, education, knowledge, if you could spend your time at Texas A&M differently, if you could spend, your professional career development a little differently, what would you try to leverage more? What would you change?
Knowing what I know now, I might have wanted to be an engineer.
Yeah.
Right. And probably, if I look back to what I did at MEI's, my executive cohort, there were a lot of engineers in there who were moving up into management positions. And I probably would have picked their brain a little bit more about managing technical projects. That's one thing that for me, managing the business, because I really started training when I was a teenager with my dad, right? That came a little more natural to me, and the corporate side of things. But managing a technical project was really tough. And when I started Alpha Space, that's what I was doing. I was managing a technical project, and I picked a doozy for my first one. And we had some failures. We didn't make our first launch, and we didn't make our schedule, and that was a tough thing to go through. It was, you don't really appreciate how emotionally attached you get to your mission when you're working on something like that. I really, working in the corporate office at MEIT for 15 years, you sort of feel like all of the programs kind of belong to you. But when I was at Alpha Space, starting that and focused on one payload and one mission, it sort of becomes your baby. And when someone tells you your baby's ugly, that hurts, when your baby's not ready to launch, or yet, you have these hiccups. And so I probably would have focused more on some of the operational management courses that we've taken and appreciated them a little bit more. I just didn't have experience in that regard, and I didn't appreciate what we were learning or how to apply it yet. But didn't take long after I graduated to figure out that I needed to go back to some of those textbooks and review stuff. And I actually did reach out to a couple of my colleagues who were in class with me, and hey, some of them were in oil and gas industry managing technical projects, and I'd send them an email, how do you do this, or how do you optimize this? And so it was kind of a great thing, but I probably would have picked their brain a little more during class had I known what I was about to embark on.
And then what would you tell someone embarking on their first experience leading a company in general? Like, what would surprise people, even with all the stuff on, minimum viable products, although lean entrepreneurship doesn't exist for something like space tourism. There's not really, you can do iteration with something like that, but there's no way to avoid a large capital outlay. But in general, for someone getting ready to start a company, what might surprise them given kind of what is out in the general knowledge sphere for entrepreneurship, if that question makes sense?
Yeah, for someone starting out, I would probably say, for me, I have learned that the most important thing is like the right team, because if you put people in the wrong place, not only are you going to suffer in your company, but they suffer also. So you don't ever want that to happen. And you got to make sure that you're candid and honest with people about what they're getting into. So, some people like change and love a dynamic work environment, and some people don't. So, really focusing on getting the right people in the right places can be a make or break. And, I kind of learned that the hard way. We had some sort of hiccups along the way with where we placed people and who we chose to take on what roles. And you got to kind of really know your people that you're leaning on, especially in a startup where you're small and everybody has to wear multiple hats. It can be super challenging.
Yeah.
So I'd say that's the first thing. And the second thing is, you got to understand your financials. You really have to know your business plan well. You've got to stay on top of it. You can't take it for granted, especially large capital outlays up front. And you have to plan for contingencies because things happen that you can't even imagine. But, right now, COVID, right? There's an example. But, another example that we have is when there were all the fires in California, interrupted our supply chain. So we couldn't, get access to parts that we needed or computer boards that we needed and all of that. When you're working on a schedule supporting something like space flight, there's only so many launches, right, that you may be able to fit onto. And you don't get your computer board for your avionics system and you miss a launch. Those are contingencies that are really hard to make up for. So,
yeah,
always leave a little bit of management reserve, I'd say. It's a good lesson learned. And when you leave it, then double it because you're going to, if you're working a complex technical job, you're going to need it.
Makes sense. Rapid fire. I think I might know the answer to this one, given the things that you've said, but what do you consider your most valuable failure?
Well, probably, when we didn't make the first launch on the Missy, when we didn't hit that schedule. And, it's tough sitting in a conference room at NASA with 40 other experts, looking at you, and they're all trying to, those are the go, no go kind of meetings. That was a go, no go day. Yeah. And the director of the ISS, of the space station, he basically went around the room to all his experts and asked them, did they think we were ready to go? And it's very humbling to have them say, yeah, they're not ready. But out of that, I formed some great relationships, and I think we earned a lot of respect from some of the experts that were there too, including the director of the program. So, we made up for it and we made our next launch, and, it all turned out okay. But that was probably the biggest failure was, we didn't meet our schedule.
Yeah. What made you not ready for that launch? What made you miss your deadline, so to speak?
We really bit off an aggressive schedule, and we decided to build this testing facility, which would normally take, 5 to 7 years. We tried to build it in 3 years and have it ready for launch on a space-rated space vehicle, a human-rated space vehicle, right? So we had to go through all of the safety processes too, and we hit a couple of hiccups. We had Harvey in the middle of that. There were the wildfires in California. And so some of our parts didn't come in, some of our people were affected, and it was already like a really aggressive schedule. And we didn't go through all of the verifications with NASA that we had to. So the facility was done and it was built and it was put together, but we hadn't made it all the way through the processes with NASA to get it approved as safe. And so they made, I think it was a decision they made with a lot of angst also. They don't ever want to tell someone that, they're a no-go. And it causes a lot of work on their side too, because they've got to shuffle what flight we're on and those kinds of things. But it was the right decision for sure at the time. It just was a painful one.
What do you think is people's biggest misconception of you?
Earlier in my career, it's challenging being the second generation in a family-owned business. Right? And, that's the boss's daughter. So you've got to overcome those kinds of challenges and prove that you're capable and that you're competent. So earlier, that was probably a misconception, is people just thought I was there because, I was Ed's daughter and he was just giving me a free ride. I would say it's really far from the truth. In fact, I think he was probably much harder on me than he was on anyone else. And, now I think a big misconception about me is probably, I never feel satisfied. Like, I think it's part of that sort of entrepreneurial spirit, and it's just sort of ingrained in me. So I've accomplished, some great things, but I just don't feel satisfied. Like I just, kind of hunger for a little bit more. And I think part of that is, in our MBA program, we did the Strengths Finder test, right? I'm a learner, I'm a strategist, and those sort of things. You just kind of want to keep going and always kind of learn a little bit more, try the next project. And sometimes I take on too much. a couple of businesses and a couple of kids at home. And that's a lot to do, but I love it.
If you could have anyone as a mentor for one day, who would it be?
I was thinking, it'd be cool to sort of hang out with Elon Musk for a day, right? Because he's in the industry that I'm in, and he's made huge strides, and he's so driven, and I think he has a unique approach. So that would be one I would love to just sort of be more of a fly on the wall. But then there are people, even like Oprah Winfrey. I mean, she's built this massive empire, and she's reached out into a lot of different elements, and she's really capitalized on her strengths. And so I would love to get just some good candid advice from her too. So I kind of like spread the gamut about, who I'd love to just spend a day with. That's a really hard question. That's hard to ask a learner, right? I want to learn from everybody.
Right. What is the most important advice you would give to yourself exactly 5 years ago?
I would try to advise myself to do a better job trying to balance it all. So not take on so much. So, I started Alpha Space, finished my MBA, bought my dad's interest in MEIT, so I own that also. And I also serve on a lot of boards, and I kind of just like want to help everybody, right? I feel really privileged to do what I do, and I love like giving that platform and using that to help give back also. That's a really big piece of what I like to do. But sometimes I bite off more than I can chew. And so I don't give the best piece of me to everybody. Everybody kind of gets just a little bit of me, and that's maybe not the best way to do it. So I'd probably advise myself to sort of hone in and focus, and try to use my platform in a way that enables people to grow where they don't have to quite share it so much. Does that make sense? I don't know if I need to restate that or not, but probably advise myself to focus a little bit more and take on a little bit less so I could do a better job.
That's a good answer. What is the book you've given most often as a gift?
Emotional Intelligence. It's a great
Daniel
book.
Goleman?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, when you're working with different customers and different businesses, like we do, you really have to, sometimes you're working with technical customers and sometimes business side, and you've got to be able to make those translations. And so, also working with people in general, right? Anytime you have employees, you've got to be able to understand and empathize with other people. So that's a great one. I recommend it to everyone, all of our managers. We talk about it at our leadership summit.
If you could have a billboard anywhere with anything on it, where would it be and what would it say?
Yeah, well, right now it would, it'd probably be in the middle of, New York City, somewhere really populated, and it'd be, how can I help you send something into space, right? Because that's really where I'm at. But I may sneak my kids into the billboard too, right? It's just a little cute kid cameo there. And then, maybe a little one-liner at the bottom about, how great our employees are who can help you get something into space. But that's probably what I would do is let people know space is open for everybody right now.
Very briefly, what is your fondest memory of TAMU?
I love it all. For me, probably, I just love going to Kyle Field. My parents were season ticket holders. My dad's an Aggie. One of my brothers was a 12th man. So, growing up, always went to Kyle Field with my parents. And then, I went to A&M, got to go as a student, different kind of experience. And now, we get to go and take our kids, and my parents still go. And it's just this great little family getaway that we get to do. And so I'd say just sort of walking into Kyle Field I just love it. Everything we do in the fall sort of revolves around Aggie football.
It's the best. Anyone you would like to send good bull?
I'm give good bull to my dad. He's really, he really inspired me in so many ways. And he and my mom, they just, they gave us a lot of freedom, my brothers and I, to make our own choices and do what we wanted to do. And, he kind of enticed us a little bit too, and just laid a great foundation for us.
Fantastic. Stephanie, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. It's been fun.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. For our MasterCast top 3 takeaway, I wanted to start with an incredibly scientific takeaway, which is that Ryan and I are reading Red Rising, which is it's 2 trilogies. So I don't know what that means. It's 6 books are going to be. The author's working on the last one.
It's a sexology.
Ryan told me when we started it that he had finished the trilogy, but he only finished one of the trilogies. So there's still, the final book has not been written. So I feel like we're going to get in a Game of Thrones Kingkiller Chronicle issue where we can't read the last book, and I'm going to be really mad. But we're currently over halfway through with book 3, but it's super good. And when she said Space War, it reminded me of Red Rising, of the series, because they have lots of space wars. It's a resettlement of Mars.
Yeah.
And it's so good. I love it so much.
It sounds good.
I want you to read it so I have someone to talk to about it.
Okay.
But I mean, I have Ryan to talk to about it because we're the cutest couple in the world and we read it out loud together. So we talk about it a lot.
I'm also happy to give it a try. I can't promise that I'll finish it.
No, I know. You're good about that. So I don't feel bad recommending something to you because you'll just stop reading it.
No, yeah, it's it's a blessing and a curse, because most of the time I'll know 50 pages in and I'm just going to quit if I don't like it. And the one exception is my brother has been pushing me to read Stormlight Archive, and I've put it down like 3 different times. And finally this last time he was like, "This is the best fantasy series ever written, ever. Finish the book." And I said, "Okay, I'll finish the book."
And did you? Because you said that you picked it back up, but
yeah, I'm making forward progress again, and it's starting. Like I'm starting to enjoy it more. It's just it's slow going getting started, and I normally do not do well with that. But yeah, here we are.
I didn't think Red Rising was slow go. I think the writing gets better as the series goes on.
Yeah,
but the story is good from the beginning. It's fun. For our second takeaway, and again, this will not air this week, but this week, the U.S. is launching the first manned space launch is happening since 2011 when the space shuttles were retired. Yeah. And it's a joint launch between NASA and SpaceX. So there's been U.S. astronauts have gone into space, but not on a U.S. space shuttle launched from the U.S. So that's pretty cool that that's happening again.
Yeah, that is really cool.
They're going to the space station, so it'll be good to get the U.S. space program back in orbit. See what I did there?
I do see what you did there. And
thanks.
Space stations fascinate me. I'm going to go do a deep dive sometime this week on the International Space Station and on Mir, the Russian space station. Like, that existence fascinates me. The kind of solitary nature of it. You're with, a couple of other people, or maybe 6 or 7 other people. I don't know how many are on the space station now. It might be 20. It might be 50. I don't know. But
I don't think it's 20. I think it's single digits. I think you were closer with 6. Yeah. I don't know.
But just the idea of being with those people for weeks, months, years at a time, like you're all crammed together. What does that look like? What's the psychological testing for figuring out what kind of people are best suited for something like that? I
think it's pretty extensive.
Yeah.
It seems really challenging. Yeah. I can't imagine. There was a woman that came back in February. She broke the record for the longest amount of time a woman was in space, and it was 328 days. I think her name was Christina Koch. But either way, that's a long time. 328 days in space. Woo.
Yeah.
I don't know about that. We would get bored.
Yeah, you can't go wakeboarding in space, as it turns out.
But if you did a spacewalk, I think that one moment might be better than wakeboarding.
Yeah, you're probably right.
I mean, not in the space station, but if you ever got to go outside and just hang around in space, I don't know, that could keep my attention for a while. If we terraformed Mars, we could all be in space for a long period of time. Just saying. Yeah,
terraforming. I'm not.
I don't know. It's in my book.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is.
I don't know how it works.
We're going to take this planet and make it like another planet.
Well, otherwise we won't survive there. So I don't know. It kind of makes sense.
Well, I
Okay.
mean, you just have to have everything. Like everything just has to be indoors. Like as long as you can do like
Yeah.
a continuous indoor structure, you can. That part I get.
Which would be fine for you, not for me. I won't make it. I won't make it indoors. Okay, for our third MasterCast takeaway, Stephanie has a long military tradition in her family. And so just on this Memorial Day, wanted to thank them for their service.
Yes.
And for all of those who have served, we honor you today on Memorial Day.
Yes. Thank you for serving.
Ben, you want to close us with a quote?
I would love to close us with a quote. It felt as if I had moved from an empty room into a room where someone was asleep, except, of course, that there was no one there. It was as if everything around me was deeply asleep. The trees, the stones, the rippling stream that widened into Philurian's pool. All these things felt more solid, more present than I was used to, as if they were ever so slightly aware of me. From Range by David Epstein. Just kidding, Kyle. It's from Patrick Rothfuss, The Wise Man's Fear.
An MBA from Texas A&M University can take your career to a whole new level. With full-time and weekend options, Texas A&M suits your schedule. So get a better gig. Visit mba.tamu.edu.